Derek Wheatley, and welcome to episode 101 of the Wheatley podcast. Happy New Year to everyone, of course, all the listeners, anybody else who jumps in who hasn't listened to this podcast before. Obviously, I have to say a massive thank you to Tracy Bulger for coming on last week to host episode 100. I was on the other side of the thing, and it was interesting. But she was really good to come on and give it over her time. Great crack. Thanks, Tracy. Sub to our YouTube channel if you would. And as ever, thanks for your support. I want to get into this one. I'm very excited about this one. I want to welcome back the lads from the Big Beatles Sort Out podcast, Garry and Paul Abbott. How are you doing, lads?
Oh,
not bad.
All good.
Nice,
thanks. Happy New Year.
Nice to be here. Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. You know, and like a little peek behind the curtain. This isn't really the New Year yet, but it's okay because I'm going to mess it up in a little while, and I've no doubt I will do that. So, but yeah, in regards to recording and coming out, it's the New Year. Obviously, lads, we have had you on chatting about the Beatles before. Your podcast is now in its second series. I suppose the question, because in the first series, we talked about this when you were on the last time, you broke down every Beatles song. So, Garry, when you were trying to come up with the ideas for the second, that was, in my mind, it was always difficult for me to figure out what you were going to do. Where did it kind of start, really, the process of that?
I suppose when we were getting about 3/4 of the way through series one and thinking, oh, hang on. we're going to be finished soon and I'm enjoying this. So yeah, I guess just casting around for ideas, your mind goes to things like the anthology and all those kind of that resurgence of Beatles, stuff that came out in the late 90s and with the anthology and things like Live at the BBC and all that kind of thing. So that was a kind of a starting point, but it's not as easy just to go. You can't do 5 tracks from the anthology an episode because some of them are just talking, some of them are very small snippets. And obviously nowadays with all the reissued albums, there's a whole wealth of studio outtakes. So yeah, it was just trying to focus in on what would keep our format in a way that we enjoy, and it gives us a good jumping off point whilst expanding out to the wider world of the Beatles beyond the core catalogue. And I think so far we've still got a few things up our sleeve, and we're covering the anthology and the songs that they wrote for other people. And, and there's still things like the films and maybe bits like Live at the BBC. There's still a whole world out there, and the solo stuff as well. We've always done like little bonus podcasts in the main series. And actually that was dipping into some of these little worlds. So it's more of a voyage of discovery for me.
I wanted to ask you, Paul, about the anthology, the first 3 episodes, because the anthology is very dear to me because I think they came out when I was 13, and the first anthology did anyway. And I remember getting the number 2 and number 3 at the same time. I think my parents got me for my birthday for Christmas, and I had got those before I had bought or managed to buy all the albums. So I had heard a lot of songs on 2 and 3 that I hadn't actually heard the completed studio versions of them. So it was quite strange to go back then and maybe listen to Revolver, like, for instance, where it's like completely different. You picked a number of songs from say of the 3 in total. And I know Gary's scoring is kind of done on production and production, lyrics, and music. Did at any point that kind of thought process have to lead you into a way of picking a song, or could you kind of forget about the kind of production on one because maybe they're demos and that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think we had to understand that the categories that we were using, or Garry was using for measuring these things, were going to be not a pinch of salt. They're going to have to be more flexible if we're talking about stuff like the anthology. There are certain things I knew that were on those discs that are more or less finished songs and could be measured that way. But there was other things that I thought we'd want to talk about that are little more than perhaps a couple of takes, and then they were sort of half mixed or sort of just. Or if we were being totally honest, some of these things are mixed just for the anthology, so your production aspect of it is a whole sham anyway. But we did take those things into consideration, but the fun was going back to the anthologies and going, oh, if I have to distill this down into 5 picks out of it, regardless of categories, what would I take off Anthology 1, Anthology 2, Anthology 3? And there was some standout things I wanted to include, and then there was, it's like cast around for a couple of other odds and sods that I thought helped illustrate the periods that the albums were covering, really.
Yeah, and I I love the addition of, say, Junk would be a great example of a really I think you mentioned it, Garry, as kind of the perfect perfect McCartney melody kind of a thing, and he's so good at that. Like, and he was just kind of throwing them out there at the time, and obviously it ended up as a solo, but a solo song on one of his albums. But just those little tracks that like were huge songs to me at the time when I was kind of going through that kind of phase of the anthologies, and it was a lot of fun to listen to. And even like I give away the fact, obviously, already that we're not recording, and we're recording this in December, so I'm up to date on the songs that they gave away, which is something that I had one or two songs, but they were ones that were like Come and Get It was one, like, that wasn't, he obviously couldn't have because they had done it in that. But the songs that they gave away of those, like Decilla Black and that, it was a great episode because I had never, like, some of them were terrible. Like I know you had 5, but there's 2 of them were really, really bad. Like you mentioned, what is it? June Light and Moonlight, was it?
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of a thing of giving away those songs. I don't know, Garry, were you in the same boat as me with that? Like with not knowing those songs before you recorded?
Sure, yeah, and we're still we got five of those episodes coming up, so there's quite a lot of them. So I know 1 or 2, and actually I'd say Paul probably is similar in that we're familiar. The couple I know, I think we're both quite familiar with because they were probably on vinyls when we were growing up in the house.
I can illustrate this, which I couldn't actually do in our actual episode. I talk about this big box that used to be in our house, and is now in my house. It's just like that big, but it wasn't the actual albums in here. It was a bonus record called Hits of the Mersey Era. That was the thing that I used to know, which looked like this: Reader's Digests.
Oh, nice,
back memories,
which has quite a lot of Lennon McCartney covers on it from the early days, and that's where I knew a few of them. But the good thing for me as well as Garry is actually I don't know all of those ones. I've never made a point of going out and collecting all of the Lennon McCartney songs done by other people. So I'm enjoying the fact that this thing, we moved out the anthologies, which I know really well, and I held off on a couple of them so we could look at them in this next block that we're doing about songs I gave away. But yeah, it's nice for me to suddenly be listening to Lennon McCartney songs, albeit done by other people, that I don't know that well. So that's been great.
Yeah, and it's fascinating. It's always fascinating to kind of hear that idea of an artist deciding, okay, well, this isn't maybe for us, and we'll give it to someone else and see what kind of arrangement comes. Like, because Love of the Loved is one that's like got an arrangement that wouldn't have been a Beatley arrangement at all. Well, you mentioned it, the brass in particular, the way it was recorded. But we'll obviously jump back to this later on, and when we can get your little what do you call it? Advertise your podcast, but obviously, lads, we were going to have you back on at some point and talk a bit about the kind of significant events in the Beatles' lives. But I mean, it was very difficult for me as soon as I heard this was coming out to kind of not get you back on to talk about the Get Back documentary. When you first heard about the project, Garry, or even maybe seen the first trailer, was it something that you were pretty fair to say as excited as me? I would imagine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think I much more so when I first saw the trailer than I think when I heard about it. I thought I wasn't let it be a bit of a car crash. I haven't got much of a memory of it because I've only ever seen it strung together on YouTube and things. Because we've never been able to. I don't think we've ever had a proper release of it and things. And I was thinking, and then I heard that these kind of rumors that actually there's quite a lot of joy in it, and it's actually going to not just be more of the same. It's actually going to kind of reframe that all that side of things, and that got me interested. But when that first trailer dropped, with just the clarity of the footage in general, and that feeling of really being in the room with them and thinking, and the way they cut it, they did cut obviously a lot of the very fun parts together to give you a real buoyant feeling, which, it was good to get you into it. But it's true as well. It does show that there is a side to this, and I was hooked straight away from that first trailer. couldn't wait to see it, and I wasn't disappointed either. So
I saw the small, like you said there about on YouTube, some clips of Let It Be film. Paul, did you see Let It Be in its entirety?
I had a copy of it a few years ago. I got hold of a copy of it and watched. I never thought of it as being as bad as its reputation suggested, either quality-wise, I mean literal quality-wise, or content-wise. Its reputation was, I think, because of lack of availability, it became overblown. It became mythical as the breakup movie, and it's not as bad as that. There's quite a lot of fun moments in the original Let It Be, but it's not the story that it turns out that Peter Jackson has presented. I mean, and that in itself isn't the story of the entirety of 60 hours of film footage or 150 hours of tape recordings that happened at that time. But I suspect that Peter Jackson's version is a much more reflective thing compared to Let It Be, which was not just made at a time that they found very difficult. Well, it doesn't matter how it comes across on the screen. It was a difficult time for them. They had a lot going on. And then in the post of that period, when this film hadn't been edited and put together and put out yet, it was even more difficult. So it's no wonder, these people as human beings have to carry that weight of knowing what that experience was like. And it doesn't matter if we see them smiling. They had a lot of stuff going on in their heads as well. So yeah, Let It Be is not quite as miserable as people would have you believe, but I think they sort of buried it for a reason.
Yeah, when I in the first episode, it's in Twickenham the studios, and what I had read about the recording of the songs there was the fact that it was cold, it was big, there's nothing personal about it, and they talk about it a lot during it. They're kind of looking around at the place and. Like the McCartney has these great plans all the time, and it's brilliant to see. Like he's thinking that they can do things with cameras and all this kind of stuff. But you do feel that they're being kind of swallowed up by the whole Twickenham kind of experience and that kind of cold. I think I don't know if again it's like something that's been planted in my head because I've heard about the Let It Be sessions and about Twickenham, but there seems like more of a tension there in the first episode. What did you think of that, Garry?
Yeah, again, taking it out of what I've heard mostly from Paul, actually telling me about, this one was recorded at Twickenham and bits of it recorded and things like that. Yeah, I think you're right about them being swallowed up. I think you've got this I understand that the motivation, it's a blank slate. They've got this opportunity to go in a film studio, which sounds great because it's a film studio. You can fill it full of anything you want. It's a big space to work with. And then all they really do is just sit in a huddle in a tiny little bit of that, whilst this circus goes on around them of people not really knowing what they're meant to be doing and maybe just tidying up and bringing things in and out. And are we recording? Are we not? And I think what's clear from that is that they don't, their ideas, like McCartney's is kind of, as well as it's kind of, its ambition surpasses ideas. So there's some ambition there, but there's no plan. There's no plan, and no one wants to make a plan, or no one wants to be responsible for saying this is the plan, because that puts them in a position of either responsibility or authority that none of them necessarily really want. It's a very tricky time, and I think by the time they get out of Twickenham, they're a bit more in it. We're making an album mode, but there's a bit of a gig going on, and that's what they needed. They're recording again. They're actually listening. They're not listening back to themselves for most of the Twickenham, are they? They're just playing, and there's no real direction, and it's evident. There'll be a few little kind of bits I'll drop in here and there, and there was one particular, I think it was John Lennon that said it. He said, "Who's the old guy in the corner?" And I think the guy in the corner is about 25. One of the Harry Krishna lads. But there's a lots of different kind of scenes like that. And there was also that, I don't know, I'm probably reading too much into this one, Paul, but I don't know, when Peter Sellers arrives and they're all sitting around, and I think George he's not in at the moment, at that time, I should say. And John seems in a very strange kind of, he's staring the camera out of it for large chunks of that scene. He's doing his wordplay, the thing he likes to do in his own right. And Peter Sellers is kind of, again, this could be edited as well, but he seems kind of, what's going on here? This is really uncomfortable and very strange. It was just kind of, I often wonder if it's to do with
again, reading too much into it. But the idea of, not knowing how to deal with what was going on around them. Obviously, George being this gaping hole within the Beatles at the time, he had walked out of the session. That was kind of, I don't know what it was all about. Like whether John Lennon was kind of lashing out at the idea of that or the idea that the cameras are there. He seemed to be bothered more than the rest of them by the cameras.
Yeah, he has some strange reactions, John, in the course of the film. I mean, he's the one who is most obviously whacked out of it at certain points, but at other points he's the most frenetic. Such is the life of the drug user that he was at the time, by his own admission and historical understanding of it. But he is a naturally funny man, and he does try, and sometimes it comes across very easily. Other times, I suppose it depends how much you like his wordplay. But that bit where he's staring down the barrel of the camera is he's also quite a defiant man. He's a man who used to be quick to get his fists out. Remember Bob Wooler, as he keeps saying.
Yeah.
And now his confrontation is stare you down with words. But so introduce into that Peter Sellers, a man who we wouldn't describe as simple at any point. He's a complicated character in and of himself, who also, as history relates him being sort of like, when he's not in character as someone, he's kind of nobody.
Yeah.
And even though he knows the Beatles, really well, and he's met them a few times, and he's obviously working on Ringo on the Magic Christian, which is what that they've got to finish filming or get out of the way for, so Ringo can go off and do that. He turns up and he's like, he's a weird man in a weird situation. Well, John's trying to make him say the number 3 for some reason, and making some quips about don't leave needles in the bathroom. Yeah. So it's a tricky encounter of some extraordinary people at a very extraordinary time.
I think that's another thing. Like I will say for John, I saw a tweet about after the documentary came out, and someone described him as evil when he isn't playing music and joyous when he is. Obviously within that documentary, not in life in general, but I'm not quite sure I'd go that far. But I did notice, Garry, as the documentary went on and the plan was kind of coming together, he did really start to kind of I wouldn't say take over or become the leader as such, but there was definitely more of Lennon there. He came into it a bit more.
He definitely becomes more present.
Yeah,
as the process moves on, and I think they start to understand what it is they're doing there, and the songs start to develop, almost to the point where I wonder if the whole move to the Apple kind of studios and stuff kind of coincides with him going to bed a bit earlier, getting up a bit earlier, being a little less, a bit more focused on the task at hand.
Yeah.
He seems to be switched on more, doesn't he? If I remember rightly. Yeah. There's definite pre and post George leaving and them deciding to get out that Twickenham change to all of them. I think their dynamic. There are glimpses of it in Twickenham, though. Like I say, like your friend was saying, when he's playing music and Paul and him especially are locked in together, you just catch that same joy that you imagine has carried them to that point so far with the process. But they're all on the same page by the time. I think they reflect the uneasiness of the situation in the group in that first episode, don't they? And in their own ways. I mean, Ringo doesn't look the best either, but he seems to be a bit less like he's going to die by the time he gets to the second episode. Every morning he looks terrible.
He does, yeah.
And I wonder if they've come out. I don't know what immediately preceded all this. I don't know if they've come out of a period of kind of doing whatever they want and being on a complete night owl kind of schedule. And now there's people kind of turning up to work and they're not there. Yeah. And I think they just get better at it as they go along, because they do have a sense of responsibility, even though it's a slow creep. It takes them a while. It's
Ringo is always there first. He's always early, and Ringo is my kind of guy because of that. I'd kill John Lennon if he was like, that's a poor choice of words, but you know what I mean? I was like, I would be very unhappy with John Lennon turning up whenever he kind of floated in. But without that, I'm just going to read the advert now in a sec, but without that, we may not have seen the initial writing of Get Back that McCartney, that's a beautiful moment.
It's
moment.
Leaps out of the thing.
One thing actually. I know you both play bass, but the way he plays the bass in those sections of writing the songs is quite interesting. Is he playing like a kind of power chords thing?
Yeah. I haven't got my violin bass here, but because of the way the violin bass neck and the way the strings sit on it, you can strum it quite loud,
okay.
even when it's not plugged in.
Yeah.
So you can strum it slightly more effectively than like a Fender Jazz or a Fender, whatever other type of bass. So it suits him for that purpose. But the fact, he's just hitting at it.
Yeah.
He's just grabbing like a power chord of like an A and just going round and round and round, chung chugga chung chugga chung chugga chung.
That's the thing that gets it.
And it bubbles out of his mouth. Like, it just keeps going round and round and round until a song's there. It's magic.
We will talk about McCartney a bit more just because of his creativity within that kind of time span, arriving with these songs that are absolute classics. One each morning. Why not? But I'll just read the ad, lads, and we'll get back into it. Fusion Training Centre, Monksland, Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Centre or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Centre, train like a warrior. Okay, that's something to do for the new year. If you want to try something different, give Martin a shout and he will sort you out. There was also like the I guess it wasn't funny for them at the time, but the idea of this Tripoli thing kept coming up. We want to play with, in the words of Michael Lindsay Hogg, with the 2,000 Arabs and the lights and torches and stuff. And it slowly, Paul, starts to get downgraded every time there's a conversation. I just thought every time it was mentioned, it was becoming more and more hilarious, really.
Oh, it's brilliant. I mean, God bless Michael Lindsay Hogg for his sticking with it and trying over and over again. He's got the idea. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with the idea as a concept, and any more reasonable group of people would have seen that as like, yeah, do you know what? That'll be something unique. Because a few years later, Pink Floyd go off and do the Live at Pompeii thing, which is an amphitheater. It has music happening as the sun goes down. All these things that are mentioned here. But Ringo doesn't want to travel. He never wants to travel.
Yeah.
George can't stand the idea of being other people around, so he doesn't want to have to deal with that. And I think John and Paul would have done it. John, strangely, is quite keen on performing live because, like he says, it's communication. But, the logistics just send George into a cold sweat, clearly, as much as being around other people. But yeah, like you say, it just gets smaller and smaller. It's like, well, can we just try Primrose Hill, which is a few miles down the road there, and they can't even manage that because no one actually thinks about what they're going to do. It's like the way they don't think about the idea. I mean, someone mentions, oh yeah, we might get breach of the peace problems if we go on the roof. They go and do it, but no one actually sort of preps anything and tells anyone. They could have done it. They were the Beatles, but they just somehow it still feels really DIY.
Yeah,
everything they've done, they've just got all these people, but no one's got a plan.
Even before, or was it the day of the night before? Even George is still going, I don't want to go on the roof. Like he's like, I said, where are we going to play? I thought they were just, from where it started with the idea of Tripoli, I thought I was going to get all the way peeled back until they're just playing in the room that they're in at that moment. And then
I think it could have done it. I think it was very close to being that. And
it's possible. And like we'll talk about the rooftop concert because I appreciate it even more now. I haven't seen it with the build up to it, but Garry, there is the hailed arrival of Billy Preston. He shows up in Apple, and I mean everything about the guy is just, you couldn't help but be joyous in his presence.
Yeah, he's so cool.
Yeah.
He is one cool guy. And what I didn't realize, and I'm guessing, unless there's something, I mean, there might be something that wasn't shown, but he is just dropping in because he's old friends with them, and he's in town, and he's like, presumably, but they obviously in the part one, Paul McCartney and John were saying, well, maybe we should have someone playing piano, but they kind of, the idea goes, and just like everything else, no one writes it down or says, let's do something about it. It just flitters off. So the serendipity of Billy Preston turning up just at that turning point, really, where they're all starting to get it together, and actually them being like, we can jump on the keys. It's amazing, really.
Yeah.
If that was a coincidence, I mean, I don't know. I if you'd have asked me before it, I would have said I thought someone brought him in to kind of diffuse a little bit. But actually, it doesn't feel like it's in that order because they already feel like that because George is back. They've already diffused a little bit.
Yeah.
And then he comes in and it just adds another layer to it. And what about they couldn't have had a better person because he's obviously someone who's so good.
Yeah.
I mean, you know he's good from the recordings, but when you see him just jamming, you realise he's not just good, he's outstanding.
Yeah.
And he can just sit down straight away and be on whatever they're playing, and there's no having to stop and show and stop. It's just like he can look, he can eyeball what they're doing, and he can be straight on it. Yeah, and he's brilliant, and he really just should. It's a shame he didn't in some way. Well, I don't know if it's a shame actually, because I'm happy with the whole catalogue, but. If they had carried on, you'd have hoped he'd have stuck around. But then they did do Abbey Road, and he wasn't. And he's on some of it, isn't he?
Yeah, he's on a couple of bits of that.
Yeah, and he could well have been the fifth Beatle for all. If
I think they would have been happy with him as a fifth Beatle. I was watching that section today where they're talking about it and it's only Paul who's sitting back in his chair like, and John and George are like, yeah, and George is like, would get anyone. Dylan would join. It'd be like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Which is clearly the concept he then takes later and sticks into the Travelling Wilburys.
Yeah,
he'd have been happy. He'd have had anyone in the Beatles because it would have meant not less work for him, but less scrutiny of him, maybe less pressure on him. I don't know, but I think that would have been ludicrous. But yeah, they should have had Billy, and who knows what that could have happened if they'd have given him the rubber stamp official.
Official. I wonder if he saw, like, particularly Billy Preston, or even if he's talking about Dylan or Clapton, like if he saw that would be one on his team, that
possibly,
and like, which is fair enough, because there was a part that really I was kind of disappointed. There was a couple of parts I was disappointed when he did appear, or he did show his songs or sit down to play like I Me Mine, and it was like Lennon just was not really bothered about it. He kind of went off and had a little dance and things like that. And you kind of like, even with All Things Must Pass, and I know they did kind of work on it a little bit here and there, but those kind of songs just, this could have sounded, because when I had you on last, I was like saying, I feel sorry for George. And now I'm like, but I do really like George. And I think he's just like, I know he's presenting these songs in front of Lennon and McCartney. I understand that. But I do think like at that point, he was really coming into his own. There was that beautiful moment where he sat down with John and Yoko, and he was talking to John Lennon about, recording his own solo album. And John Lennon was like, yeah. And then I don't know where I heard it, but in the last couple of days I heard that if McCartney didn't know of that conversation, and if he had, he would have been all for it and, said, go ahead. And you often wondered, would that have been the thing that kept them going,
Yeah, totally. I think George... George was always the unhappiest in any of the situations they were in. And I think not because of anything he was doing musically other than sort of the struggle to get his songs heard, like you say. But I've been reading a book about the Beatles in Chicago and the difference between 1965 and 1966. He did not want to be touring in 1966. He probably didn't want to be touring in 1965. And already there's, would have had different Beatles situations then. Would they have become an albums band or split up if they'd have listened to George? And if George wasn't given these, if he wasn't forced into these situations, would he have played anything at all? You don't know whether he would have just sat back and got off to some ashram somewhere and just meditated for the rest of his days. He quite possibly could have done.
Very, very stylish dude, though. I was a big fan of the George look throughout. And the thing about like when George is when they are jamming from part 2 into part 3, and Billy Preston is obviously there, and I think he mentions that in the anthology about they all started to be on their best behavior because there was like a guest there. When he is happy and he's playing, you can really see, because obviously we've only got a certain amount of clips of the band in full flow, but you can really see how, first of all, how good he is as a guitarist, because I think people still underestimate George Harrison as a guitarist a little bit, but also how important a part of the group he is. He seems to be the one that everybody forgets. Who doesn't know the Beatles? If you tell them to name the 4 Beatles, they'll name Lennon, McCartney, Ringo, and then maybe forget George Harrison. And I think he's unbelievable. I love On the Roof when he's he looks so happy when he's up there. It was just the idea of going up there. But when his amp is plugged out, he was having none of it. Look, he was straight over and he was like plugging his amp back in and almost kind of defiant. There was also a moment, Garry, where Ringo is playing Octopus's Garden, a segment of it, and George comes in and he has an acoustic guitar and starts playing with him. That was kind of an emotional moment for me, that bit, for some reason.
Oh yeah, so it's a sweet moment.
Yeah.
Especially because you've got the two. If you want to put it this way, beta Beatles, they're not. You've got the Lennon and McCartney playing, and you've got the other two like working together on something that we know is going to turn out great as well. And they've all got a lot. You can tell they've all got a lot of care for Ringo, more than out of all the combinations. You think they all have, and they all want to encourage him on. It's a nice moment, that, and I think George, he's kind of tutoring him, isn't he? But it's in a similar way that you feel that Paul's been trying to do that with George. George is trying to do that with Ringo.
Yeah.
And because there was a moment in the first part where Ringo sits down and says, "Was it Carolina?" He has a song about Carolina.
Taking a trip to Carolina.
And everyone just kind of
an ocean liner.
Yeah.
They kind of smile and laugh almost, and then nothing's said about it. You don't know if there was hours of him, and you think, "Oh, that's actually Ringo presenting his song. That's the equivalent of him turning up with 'This is what I've got.'"
Yeah.
And so it's nice to see when he does that later on with Octopus's Garden, that he's that someone takes the time. George takes that time to go, there could be something here. Maybe try this, maybe try that. And as we know, that worked out for him. So it's lovely.
I think that what is lovely with those maybe kind of stand out a bit more because it's maybe just two Beatles, in the frame. There's that bit where McCartney's sitting down playing a song, and Ringo comes in. He says, "Morning, Ringo," and they just start playing the piano together. And it's just this kind of, obviously, Paul, you probably remember the song that they're playing.
Oh, they just do a boogie woogie thing, don't they? I think they give it some on-screen name. I can't remember what they.
I brought myself a new piano. I bought a new piano.
That's what it is.
Yeah. There's lots and lots of names pop up of things they've copyrighted in bizarre combinations of Lennon, McCartney, Harrison, Starkey. But yeah, I mean, what you learn in this one is what a lot of people won't know is, I know you can't play the piano brilliantly, but Ringo can play the piano.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's got C, A minor, F, and G down, and whatever boogie woogie pattern it's needed to do a 3-chord bop with Paul McCartney. So.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. There is the thing that the last couple of years of the Beatles that was always there, and it was always the talk of Yoko, and Yoko was split with the Beatles and all that kind of nonsense. And in my opinion, nonsense. Don't come after me, whoever. But it seems to be blown out of proportion. And again, whether you'd like to think this is Jackson's cut of it and edit, and Yoko was present, and like the other people still were, like McCartney and Ringo and George's wife, but it seems that it is kind of blown out of proportion a little bit, the whole involvement she had in the breakup of the Beatles. Would you agree, Paul?
Yeah, Yoko didn't break up the Beatles, and I think the Jackson film does a great job of showing the truth of the matter in that circumstance. Because it's very often it's pinned into the Let It Be / Get Back sessions as being, that's the example of where she was always there. Well, she was always there, and they talk about it in the film. I think you've got to, what the film doesn't tell you, but some people will know, is she'd had a miscarriage in November, it was 2 months before. So it's not just them being in love and wanting to be near each other. They've been through a very dramatic emotional thing a couple of months earlier. They've dealt with it in a very bad way, partly by lapsing into more drug use, which is not great. But I mean, she's an artist. She was an artist before the Beatles were artists. She was off making avant-garde music, making avant-garde art. It's a phenomenal person. And yeah, we get the Yoko jams, but what's that? It's a small percentage of a huge amount of time, and it's a great let off steam for them as much as anything. Paul's in there on the drums or he's on his guitar, he's getting a chance to scream and shout and stuff, and Yoko gets to let off a bit of steam in those weird down moments. I think she's a fantastic and sort of phenomenally interesting character. But then you get that lovely moment, it's just that lovely shot of her and Linda just having a chat, and you can't hear what they're saying, but they're front of frame, and they're just human beings with their partners in this really bizarre situation, and they're just having a nice chat and a laugh.
Yeah, and it can't be, nobody can say that they aren't enjoying jamming with her in those moments. You know,
No,
you
not at all.
clearly see they are. There's also that like, really cute moment where Heather is there, and she's just looking at her when she's singing. But then when she goes up to the mic about a minute later, she copies the exact way that Yoko had been singing in that way. And you know, to see the Beatles interact with Heather is just again just something very natural, normal things that normal people do. Like they were normal people, obviously, but like John talking about eating cats, which is maybe a strange way to go, but it was obviously framed in a very playful way. And obviously Ringo again, she was dressed very similar to Ringo in that
mini Ringo.
It really was. She really was a mini Ringo. Yeah, I'd be the same on Yoko. Like the whole thing. I'm a big fan of Yoko. I think some of her work is amazing. She did a lot of great things. I think Gary, when we talk about the leader in the band at that time, it certainly came across in the documentary that it was Paul McCartney, both you know as the leader in terms of driving the band forward, and also in creative terms.
Yeah, I think that's. You've got to have a lot of sympathy for all of them, but Paul especially, I think, because just to kind of go back a bit to that question before this question, is that as far as who, you know, why the Beatles broke up, there's obviously lots of reasons, but a huge one was obviously the death of Brian Epstein.
Yeah.
Two years before this documentary, 18 months, whatever it was. They still haven't recovered from it. It's obvious that they still don't have a guiding hand. And they talk about it, you know, and Paul McCartney says it quite clearly. We need someone to tell us you've got to do this, because he doesn't want to. You can tell he doesn't want to be it, and that's why he says, "I hear myself annoying you when I'm trying to not just drive individual songs, but like obviously people orbiting them all the time, and you can see them kind of cornering them off into different directions to try and get anyone to say yes to something, because they want the money to flow. Like any industry, they need the money to flow and decisions to be made for things to happen, and none of them really are stepping up to it. George, to be fair, is quite contrary a lot of the time. I don't know if it's just reflecting his mood. He doesn't. He's like, I will do it. I won't. I don't. Whatever. You know, that doesn't really get you anywhere. John, at his worst, is just completely passive.
Yeah,
and it's just like. Oh. And Ringo's not going to be bleeding from the drums, so I think it is left to Paul. But I don't think he wants it to be. So it becomes almost an argument about him not wanting to be the person who is in charge, which is why it becomes very confusing when you hear like the secret recording of him and John discussing what happened after George left, and it's almost you can't really latch on to what the actual discussion was about, because they're just talking in these very abstract terms about what decisions and the nature of how you even come up with any kind of direction. It's not solid things like we need to do this and this song he didn't want to do it. They're talking about their relationships in an abstract way, and I think it's a very complex situation that would be sorted by Brian. If Brian Epstein was still around, I think he would have kept them reined in and on point, and I think that's what they were lacking.
Yeah, and he isn't overly comfortable, like you said, with the idea of being the driving force, because he says himself, you know, it's this. I can hear myself annoying it. It's a strange position to be put in. But Paul, when you look at the songs he's bringing in, it's like, you know, Let It Be, Long Way the Road. I know Backseat of My Car is another one that went on to the solo album. It's really ridiculous to think that a guy is just churning these songs out.
Oh, it's mad to think. I mean, it's because it comes so naturally to him. I don't think he ever realised, and I don't think he still realises. I think he's just done his lyrics book, and he's starting to. I still think this is part of McCartney's therapy. So letting Get Back, the documentary, come out, letting his lyrics book come out. I think he's still basically in a self-created therapy to deal with him being him and him having lived the life he's lived. Whether he's ever sought professional, you know, therapy is something we'll never know probably, but. He doesn't realize how good he was, and that other people aren't necessarily doing. He knows he's with the best band in the world ever, but John's not turning up with anything.
Yeah.
So he's thinking, well, this person who he called the boss at one point, he says, "No, this is you. You're still the boss, John." But he's not turning it. But he was just waking up. It's like I just imagine him waking up in the morning, like in a daze, it's like surrounded by bits of paper. I've written another 18 songs last night. I don't remember doing it.
Yeah.
And it's not. You know, some of it's tripe, and some of it stays there as little demos and odd bits and pieces, but a massive amount of it turns into astonishing songs.
Yeah,
and great hits.
Yeah, and that's it. Would be interesting to get inside John's mind for that, because obviously they were obviously partners at the beginning, but then they became a competition. When they started to write obviously separately for the most part, and as he's bringing out these now, John does have a couple of songs on the album, obviously, and I actually quite like Dig a Pony, to be honest. And I've got a feeling it's a kind of a collaboration. Is that right? Yeah. It's more McCartney.
It's two things stuck together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Over some very. The chords have, I got a feeling, are ludicrously basic, but
I love it. Though.
Oh, it's amazing! It is amazing. It's a great guitar song, and they've managed to stick these. You stick a bit of Paul with a bit of John, just over essentially the same chords, and it turns into that fantastic track.
Yeah, and the creative force, and I don't know if you actually know this, lads, but there's the part at the end. I heard a bit of criticism, but I'm guessing it was more to do with the fact that they didn't have the footage of the recordings at the end when he was doing what they were doing, Let It Be and The Long and Winding Road.
Yeah, it's a tricky. I know Peter Jackson had to make some decisions over what and how to include in terms of that. There's no full performances of anything in there except the rooftop, and the rooftop's obviously interspersed with cutaways. So I don't know. He delivered something like 2.5 hours longer than anyone was expecting, and I suspect he still had to make some compromises. Plus, he was trying not to repeat anything that was in the Let It Be film. So he was, I don't know. I desperately want there to be a really packed extended edition Blu-ray box set.
Yeah.
Which, if Peter Jackson gets his way, there definitely will be. It's just a case of whether the other force is involved.
So yeah.
I hope you could just pick it. You could go down your menu and just pick. I want to see Let It Be from day 25.
Yeah,
that would be amazing.
That's the dream right there. So Gary, when in the inclusion of obviously George Martin is in and out, and Glyn Johns, Glynis as John keeps calling him, which I found out actually. This is me trying to find out more about Glyn Johns, and I went down a kind of rabbit hole, and I found out that he was he basically was recorded everyone, and that the reason he was being called Glynis Johns because he appeared in the front cover of Led Zeppelin's first album. Glynis Johns, the actress, did, but it was a tribute to Glyn Johns. This is what I heard. Paul will probably correct me.
No, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
It was not. It's not. I don't know why, but was he? Obviously, he was working on the Zeppelin work at the start.
Yeah. Oh, he did tons of stuff. I mean, he was the rock producer of that era, or the rock engineer. Because obviously in this situation he's not technically a producer, although he sort of is because George isn't there all the time. But yeah, he works with the Who, he works with Led Zeppelin, he works with all sorts. He pioneers a drum technique called the Glyn Johns technique and things like that. So he would have been known to basically every rock band at the time. Did a lot of that live sound for like the Rolling Stones circus, the rock and roll circus that keeps getting mentioned. That John keeps rehearsing his section, his introduction section for.
Yeah, he's very dramatic with it.
Yeah. So but the weird thing, of course, Glynis Johns, who was in Mary Poppins, which was obviously a huge film in the middle of the 60s. So that's what John keeps calling him. Glynis Johns.
There's a moment, not a moment, but obviously a full day then when they're kind of, keeps moving equipment around to get the right sound, obviously. And that's one of my favorite moments throughout it because they're just doing what they want to do then. They're playing all the old songs and like little bits and pieces of other ones. And it's really good. And like George Martin there is a moment where he does mention, Gary, about just letting Glyn Johns finish it, like, because he started it, so why not? And I know that they had to kind of rope George Martin back in for Abbey Road to kind of tell him that it was going to be recorded in the way it should be. We don't want to get in fights and stuff like that. It's going to be recorded like the old days, as it were. But like George Martin has become, I don't know if you know this guy, he has become quite a sex symbol on Twitter over the last couple of weeks. Yeah,
that's passed me by.
There you go. It's apparently it's just I don't know. I guess so many people had seen him as an older gentleman, and these were in his prime, I suppose.
Yeah, but I mean, not that this is old in any way, because for a start, it's he's the same age as. Is he the same age as you are now, Paul?
I'm just checking that
I think
now.
he's 43 at the time of at the time
Yeah,
of
so
filming.
it's my age. Yeah,
He's your age.
yeah, it's my age.
And he's very
It's
suave still, and
Yeah.
he's, and 43 is no age, it's only notable in comparison to all the 26, 27-year-olds he's obviously hanging around.
Yeah.
He's never going to dress like Glyn Johns dresses.
No.
So by comparison, he appears. I don't know. He sort of appears like he's a bit more straight, a bit more straight down the line, as he always did. The reports of him shirt and tie, and the sort of the industry expectation that he'd wear a shirt and tie to do the job that he did. But yeah, he's a very handsome chap. He's remarkably, and because he's got such a, he's in a tough situation, but we see a lot of cheery smiles from George in this. He's chatting and laughing, and yeah, so he's a very appealing character, and I suppose his son Giles, who does so much of the remixing now, who looks very much like him, he's inherited that very good look of the Martin genes.
Yeah, and like I love the people that are coming in and out, like even the people bringing in the tea, and there's just the kind of random people knocking around there we go. That's your mug. But even like the guy sweeping at the start, and it's just I know that was more of a kind of setup for the film, but just the people coming in and out and the fashions of the day, and it adds to the whole kind of tone of the film, like that it's not just the four Beatles intensely. Obviously, Gary, I have to talk about Ringo because, I mean, you can't not talk about Ringo. Everybody loves Ringo. Even in it, they talk about Ringo, as even Linda McCartney mentioned that she feels the calmest around Ringo. I know you said it and you're right about the first episode that he does look wrecked all the time, but as he, as it kind of goes along and it becomes a little bit more stress free, I guess, you kind of get to see more of his personality come out.
You do, although I still think he's Sleepy Ringo for a lot of it. He does seem, I imagine, I'm going to take a wild stab in the dark here, that Ringo was drinking quite heavily throughout this entire period. I don't know. That's not based on anything other than watching this documentary and thinking, there's a man who's drinking quite heavily throughout this whole thing. And he's in a bit of a cycle of hangover, waking up, being happy, getting a few drinks down, and that seems to be quite repeated. But he's just so content to sit at his drums, and just there's never any moment where you think they have, musically especially, apart, Paul might say do this, do that, and Ringo will just do that, and you just see how solid he was as a backbone to them as a band, and then just how kind of honest and down to earth he was as a person as well. I think he doesn't say. I kind of wished I got a bit more Ringo out of it, because he just doesn't have to say much or do much. He's not getting pulled into a lot of it. But when he does say something, it's always cute and charming. Even when he's just admitting to having farted, it's just one of the funniest things. It's just like it's like he's concerned for the people around him. I thought I'd best tell you. He's not doing it in a kind of a, he does seem like you'd want him to be your friend, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
You'd definitely. And it would be, and he would want to be, and he'd be nice. And, and you wouldn't have to worry about, is this a bit complex? Does he like me? Some people, you imagine with Lennon, you'd be thinking, I don't even know if this guy likes me, or if you'd want him to, but he's a complex person. And George as well. Well, all of the other three, really, I think. I think with Ringo, you probably just knew where you stood with him.
Yeah, that's, and there's moments, I can't remember the song they're playing. It might have been The Long Way Road, where Paul looks at him, Paul, and he's playing these he keeps saying, play this up here and this here, and he's almost doing it like as if Ringo's a whole like percussion section of an orchestra up the back, as if he's going to be able to do how many hands has he got. But yeah, like you say, Gary, that idea that they almost just let him do what he wants because they know what he's going to do is the right way to do it. And Paul, throughout the Beatles' career, that's kind of worked.
Oh yeah, I mean, they could rely on him. Yes, there's definitely, what we don't know is how much there is sort of. This is the only time we get any glimpse of how much do they talk to each other during the process of writing and recording a song. And we see a little bit of them suggesting stuff to Ringo and things like that. But Ringo's drum sound it comes from him. Yeah, obviously he's got the kit, a particular kit and a particular set of skins and things like that on it, and that he's either changed or he's not changed. He changes his skins like once in the entirety of their career on these things. But his physical feel and ability to just go in and do it and know that he's in, like they always say about when they find Ringo, as you know, when he comes into the band after Pete Best leaves, they knew that they were complete, and that's what happens right through, and it's nice to see him actually. Yeah, like you say, I'd like to see more of him talking. I'd like to see more Ringo chat.
Yeah,
but it's just to hear his ability as a drummer, his ability to lock in, his ability to just be tight and interesting and creative and not over the top, but just produce some, because he has quite a job to do with some of these songs. You know, it's not
They're not straightforward, are they?
no, they play all these rock and rollers in between, but actually it turns out that the songs that they're playing are all require something specific and individual and quite clever. Like things like Don't Let Me Down and stuff like that. You can't just go 4 to the floor. Even Get Back, which he ends up being like one pattern all the way through. He has to find that pattern and make it work.
Yeah.
And have the feel for it. Gosh, he's amazing.
Yeah, he is amazing. And if for people who don't listen to the Beatles a lot and will only have these kind of ideas, there's always the Ringo can't play drums and Yoko split up the Beatles, and I think we've put both of those to bed for forever. That's it now. But I did mention the rooftop concert again. It's because obviously I got to see the whole rooftop concert, but the lead up to it, and you know what started with Tripoli and ended up where they ended up. But it's brilliantly dramatic in the way it's done in the film, because it's obviously we see the Beatles, but then we see, you know, sections cut away to the crowd on the street, and then you know, the camera in the reception area, and everybody downstairs is kind of in on it. Garry, there was the Bobbies who arrive on the scene, very angry looking, particularly the lead guy of the two in the first place. I don't know if I knew what the outcome was, but yet somehow Peter Jackson made me believe that something else was going to happen.
I think, yeah, but I don't know if we've ever seen quite so much of. I mean, it's hard because it's scraps and bits and bobs of that rooftop concert that, you know, we've seen over the years. Quite so much of the kind of holding him at the door, the kind of like the diversions that they were creating for him to keep him there. So you do get a feeling it's not so much that it's not going to happen, but how much longer is it? Are they going to get out of this? This kind of like, oh well, we'll go and check. Someone's gone up to check, and you know, they'll be back in a minute, and then we go, all right. And I know obviously that's not. No one's really doing anything at that point. They're just buying another 15, 20 minutes, and then saying we can come up, but you can't come all the way up because the roof capacity is not like they care about the roof capacity when they've got all the PA up there and all the film crew and everyone up there. It's just and the chap, I think it came out. I've seen it on social media today that he was 19. That policeman. 19 years old, trying to close down a Beatles concert, more or less single-handedly. I don't know if it was him or there's the two initial ones there, but these two young guys, and actually, I think he's a bit. To be fair to him, he's a bit between a rock and a hard place. He's got to do something because they didn't go and get any permissions at all.
And he was very polite, like you know, and that's interesting as well because. The guy, the second guy who arrives, the police officer who's I think he's a sergeant, but he comes in and you're thinking, oh, this guy looks really pissed, you know. But he was as polite. He's like, do you mind if I pop up there? It's kind of like, oh, this is very mind your manners kind of experience. There obviously is so much going on. There's a TV show over here called Reeling in the Years, and it shows. You know, it shows all like kind of obviously history, moments of history, and people being interviewed, and I'm fascinated by the interviewed people. Paul, there was those people on street level. Something very, very heartwarming about those people.
Oh, it's a brilliant thing that exists. That they did have someone down with a tape recorder to go and do those interviews, because it could have just been crowd shots, and that's mainly what we've seen over the years in the various bits and pieces. It's just there are people on the streets looking up like that. But the fact that they ask people and they get an interesting cross section, generally mostly positive as well. What the thing that really warmed my heart was at least a couple of folk they ask and they say, "Oh, do you like the Beatles?" And they go, "Yes, because my kids have been playing their records and I now like them." Yeah, like it's gone generationally back up to the parents who happen to be out and about. on this tiny London street. That's one thing that the film doesn't show you. Savile Row is not a big street. It's quite a small, very closed little street. So it must have been odd for that many people to be around there, suddenly stopping in the street and everyone looking up. Apart from that miserable old git who's the guy who's telling the police officers where to go.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I don't like him. He's villain number one.
There's
now.
always a snitch, though, isn't there?
Yeah.
But there was an older man who was there. I say older man. He was probably around 19, but he looked.
Yeah.
But he said at one point, again, do you like the Beatles? And he was like, oh, they're marvelous. They're great and all. Would you let your daughter marry one? Yeah, they have loads of money. That's a good answer.
Yeah,
but the music, the songs that they do, and obviously some of the takes end up on the actual album. I wouldn't like the music's unbelievable. Again, with the reluctance, and I would have loved if someone hit a microphone in that meeting. The meeting that they said to be had before they went up on that roof, because George was obviously still reluctant in a way, but they obviously got up there wearing the famous clothes. Well, they became famous. They weren't famous then. I would have liked a little Billy cam just to have one on Billy, because it just would have been a beautiful moment. But they really, like, when they play those songs, Gary, they really like knocked them out of the park.
Oh yeah, you could see them just settling straight back into something they'd obviously missed.
Yeah.
And I think with performing, no matter whether you're the Beatles on the roof of on Apple rooftop or anyone, if you do take time away from it, the thought of doing it can sometimes become this kind of monster that of the expectation, the anxiety, the nervousness even of doing it. And actually when you do go up and break that kind of that fallow period of not performing, and you get that endorphin rush, and they obviously know more than anyone probably will ever know about what that could have meant. You could just see them. It's such a shame that was the last live performance, because I think they just get back in their stride. And I think they're also clocking whilst they're there. This is quite iconic, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're doing an open air rooftop concert.
Yeah.
And even though it was like a half thought mentioned before, the police probably are going to turn up, and we probably are going to get that moment. And after everything, they've still managed to engineer through sheer kind of inaction almost, and just kind of confused jumbledness, and people desperately trying to find something they can do, to the point where they don't even leave the building that they're in. They've still managed to engineer an iconic moment that's going to go down in history forever, and they're enjoying it. They're enjoying the moment. It's a bit strange because you don't realize that they played every song about three or four times.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, and so it makes it a little less kind of like in and out type of feel to it. Like, actually, if you were someone who was putting up with the noise, after you're hearing the song for the third time, you might think, well, come on, it's going to go on all day? If you're one of those gentlemen down to street level. But yeah, I just think they're really enjoying it, and it's lovely to see them settling into their old habits.
Yeah, and there's the look that we hadn't seen before, that McCartney, the look of glee and kind of devilment on his face when he sees the police officer for the first time. He's thrilled with himself. So Paul, out of anything that we haven't mentioned before, was there anything in particular that stood out for you?
I think the thing that I really liked across the whole of the thing was, it's not that it diffuses the myth about how they write songs, but it explains a little bit more about how the Beatles would write songs. That in some cases they're going to bring, Paul McCartney's going to bring in something pretty solid, but he might then sit at the piano and it's Mal Evans who says, well, put standing there and waiting there, swap that round. Because occasionally, as we were doing like the main series of our podcast, it's like I'd find a bit of information and say, oh yes, Mal Evans suggested that line, and that's like become part of Beatles lore. But actually, it's not as dramatic as that. It's because they were all around together. You also see like George giving loads of arrangement advice. George Harrison, he's like playing other people's songs, even like Get Back, where he's only just doing the chug guitar part. He's still working on the arrangement with them and suggesting structure and form and things like that. And all that stuff of how they actually do operate as a unit, regardless of who brings in the material. And it's not just them. It's those trusted people around them, like lovely Mal Evans and presumably there'll be things we haven't seen in there, like things that George Martin would have suggested. And I love that. I love seeing that. And it's And I think that's the joy of the whole thing is you don't ever see a band make an entire album
Yeah.
anywhere. No one's got that footage. Now it's just sad that we don't have it for every Beatles album.
Yeah, that's true.
know,
Yeah,
so-
a lot of people seem to mention that as well. Like it was kind of became a hot topic. What album would you like to see that treatment done for? Which is a beautiful idea. What about you, Gary? Was there anything that we haven't mentioned that stood out for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One thing is how much of Abbey Road we get to hear in its kind of conception as well, because that I was rewatching them, and especially episode 1, it starts to drop off once they kind of realize what the core is they're doing for this. But you are hearing things from Abbey Road, which is so you do kind of get 2 for 1. You get Let It Be
you
and
get
Abbey
like
Road,
you almost get
loads.
2 albums worth of
Yeah.
song material in this. It's brilliant.
So that's great. But on a broader thing, yeah, it's similar in that it kind of demythologizes them in one way and remythologizes them in another. So in one way, I feel much more connected to them as just a bunch of 20 something guys at that time. You know, they are just normal people, but also they're just even more extraordinary to me that they were still. What really gets me is that at the point we're watching them, when they still seem like slightly directionless, confused 27, 28-year-old guys who seem really normal in lots of ways, that they've already done Sgt. Pepper by this point.
Yeah,
That's in the past.
yeah,
They did that, and they're still like, oh, George is still doubting himself, and Paul and John are still sometimes a bit like, are we any? I think we're quite good musically, quite good. They still don't understand at this point.
They have their own weird sort of group nostalgia of things.
Yeah.
Because they always were moving forward. I think everything becomes nostalgia for them instantly.
Yeah.
There's like they're looking back and they're playing things like Love Me Do and even like hints of things like Ask Me Why and some weird things like that.
Yeah.
But to them, that's like the far past as
Yeah.
opposed to
Couple of
6 years
yeah.
ago, or even stuff that they mentioned from a couple of years. Like when we were doing Pepper, Paul's
Yeah,
saying like it was 50 years ago. It's,
yeah.
And you get a link back to those eras just through their personalities in this era.
Yeah.
The way that they talk about stuff, and you think it mustn't have been that much different in a way than there, because they're not like, well, how George. I know they in the early days they'd go in and do all their albums very quickly, but you get the feeling that the White Album and Sgt. Pepper's and stuff and Magical Mystery Tour were this kind of emerging out of a bit of a. It wasn't like they just came in with these amazing, like all detailed plans. They've emerged out of the dynamic and people around them and what situation they're in and how they're getting on, and actually that makes it even more amazing. So yeah, they're more normal to me now, and also it's just twice as extraordinary. It's strange, really.
It was when I first saw the trailer and heard about it, and I heard it was going to be a film. I thought like this is going to be like 2 hours. This would be great, and then it came out it was going to be 3 parts. It was going to be 8 hours, and I thought. This obviously is not just me. I'm sure many people thought, but I was a bit worried about it that it was going to be something that was a bit bloated and a bit, over the top or whatever phrase you'd want to use. But I honestly, I loved the thing. Obviously, I watched it a couple of times, and I even got Disney in for it. Like, do you know what I mean? And I hate Disney. Like, well, hate's a strong word, but the monopolization of everything that Disney does, I don't like that. But it's beside the point. I just wanted to have a dig, but I do think that like I absolutely adored it. Like, and every piece was. You mentioned the restoration, Gary. Like that was phenomenal work. Really like looking through a window at a band rehearsing. But I did I think. Oh, they're doing. I've got a feeling again. I didn't care if they played it 50 times because I love the song so much. And that you were saying, Paul, about like the way they change it. Someone will have a suggestion and someone will put something in here. Like it couldn't have. I didn't think it would meet the kind of expectations I had for it, but it honestly did. I think, as a music documentary, I talked to a couple of Beatles fans and said you have to watch it. But I even talked to people who aren't Beatles fans but are creative people. I think it's a perfect way of looking at creativity, and looking at a band like the Beatles doing it. Paul, you obviously would rate it 10 out of 10, I would imagine.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, the only thing that could make it better is if it existed as a sort of everything that was recorded and filmed, and you could actually just say, I want to see day 3 at 2:00 in the afternoon, and
Yeah.
you could go in, press a button, and just see it. It's the only thing that could make it better, really. I was very pleased when Peter Jackson's name was attached to it, because I'm a big fan of his, his epic scale ability. I mean, I think he let himself down with The Hobbit a little bit, but I'm an extended version of the Lord of the Rings type guy, so I'm quite happy with this. A lot of stuff, and for him to find the storytelling beats within the thing without having to overly manufacture it at all, really is an extraordinary achievement. It's so much more than just a documentary. So, and like you say, as a case study in creativity under the most bizarre and extreme circumstances, there's nothing to touch it, really.
And on the scale of 1 to 10, Gary?
Oh, it's a definite 10. Yeah. There's nothing. I mean, like Paul said, you'd add in. I think the bigger the Beatles fan you are, and especially if you're a musician as well, and you perhaps I've been in rehearsal rooms and done that. The value of watching every single second of that is just like amazing. From a craft point of view. So yeah, I'd have more, but then it would just get 10 plus points, whatever. It'd break the scale.
We know you love scoring things, so but listen, obviously swinging back to your own podcast, could you tell people where they can find the Big Beatles Sort Out podcast?
But yeah, I mean, you'll find it on all of your normal podcast apps. So you should find it on Apple Podcasts and on things like Acast, and we're hosted by Anchor, and so it's distributed everywhere. Amazon as well, it's got it on Amazon Podcasts apparently, and you can to hear more from us and keep up with what we're doing. We have a Twitter feed at @big_sort, which is also our Instagram feed handle as well, and we're always chatting on there with our listeners and having the general Beatles conversation that's going on between lots of Beatles podcasts out there. So if you do drop by and come and find us there, really, we'll post all the links up on there as well. So it's the best place, really.
And
Twitter.
I'll put the links up. But I think from my point of view, obviously I jumped in maybe halfway through your podcast, so I got to go back and listen to the early ones. But I think I mentioned when you were on the last time, the idea of the random thing is great. The way you picked it, and this is obviously talking about the first series, and you could be talking about a song from Please Please Me to right into Let It Be, and I thought that's what's brilliant. If it was broken down per album or something, it'd still be obviously brilliant to listen to. But I like the range, and obviously, like I said, obviously 4 episodes into the second series at the time of recording, and we won out tomorrow. Won't it be, lads? I mean, tomorrow. Tomorrow.
Tomorrow, as of the time of recording, which will be
everyone else is past.
Yeah, they're all. Yeah, that's so confusing. This part.
Yeah.
Well, listen, that's
by the time you listen to this, by the time you listen to this, we should have all of the 5 episodes we're doing for the songs they gave away. So we're doing 25 songs.
Oh, brilliant!
That went to other acts. We've done 3 anthologies, and we're gonna have a little break. So by the time this goes out, we'll be on a tiny little New Year's break whilst we come back to talk about stuff. My mind is going to the movies in general.
Oh yeah, I like the idea there.
Yeah, and covering them, at least an episode per movie, I think. But we'll see. We're gonna have a think about what else there is, because there's still their solo stuff as well, and I wouldn't want to go into all the same. We'd have to think about how we do it, I think. But it's there's definitely still stuff to be talked about, as proven by this epic documentary that's landed on our laps in the last month.
Correct. I love the idea of the solo stuff actually as well. But no pressure. But lads, Garry and Paul, thank you very much for coming on. Absolute pleasure talking about the Beatles with you, but even more so being able to talk about something that came out, when I'm old enough to appreciate it with regards to the Beatles. So thanks very much. If you wouldn't mind sticking around, just so I'll take a photo after I close this out.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so I want to thank John as well and wish him a happy new year, of course, for all his technical abilities that I do not possess. Happy New Year to my mum and dad, my granddad, Jer and Calvin. Thanks to Jer. I should have said this in the last couple of episodes, but he put some stuff together for episode 100. So thanks very much for that. subscribe to YouTube. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and also on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, etc. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this Beatles episode. And lads, thanks again.
Cheers.
Okay, everyone, have a lovely week and chat to you next week. Take care. Bye.